Okay, I'm going to try this again. I'm having to time these videos on what passes for good days for me. Normally I'm handheld with the camera, but right now I'm on some medication which is giving me the shakes, so I'm having to get a little bit more creative here. So the previous video covered the sudden onset of MALS on March 20th, coming out of nowhere as near as we can tell, and went through the 12-day hospital stay where I basically speed ran the whole onset, diagnosis, and surgical resolution of MALS. I can't stress how unusual that is. All of the research we've done online, A, it is more common in younger women. B, usually the symptoms are more like pain right here after eating. And C, it usually takes years to get it diagnosed properly. Turned out to be very fortunate. We went to Scripps. They treated it seriously. We were able to get all sorts of tests because I was in the hospital. But part of that is I think the pain I was dealing with was worse than kind of your standard book MALS diagnosis. I mean, I couldn't manage. This wasn't like I would eat and I would feel a little uncomfortable. This was like I was in bed rolling around going opioid to opioid, like not able to take it until I was driven into the ER. And through it all, the only thing that really gave me any sort of a break was larger doses of IV Dilaudid. If I wasn't on that, I was basically just hurting almost nonstop. It would get a little better, a little worse, but intractable gut pain was what all the charts said. So I had surgery for the second time. The first one was a diagnostic laparoscopy, and they basically fixed that compressed artery. So theoretically, blood was started to perfuse back down into my organs, and basically right away there was an improvement. The pictures from the hospital afterwards, I mean, you can see there just isn't that cloud on my face. And every doctor who came by made mention of that. And I could just kind of see on Jen's face how much happier she was seeing me not be in pain and as miserable. So on the 4th of April, I was discharged. Jen took me home to a temporary rental we had. And the next couple of days was mostly dealing with like post-surgical issues. The surgery was deep and it was major per the surgeon. You know, I was feeling pretty fragile after everything. I had 9 incisions between the 2 laparoscopic surgeries. Fortunately, the referred pain in my shoulder only lasted about 2 days. But yeah, I could move around. I was encouraged to move around, but I had to be really, really careful. Fortunately, Jen and I have some experience with these sort of like longer term recoveries. I had a knee injury years ago, and the knee surgery about 2015 or so had me in bed for a while. And so, you know, we knew we got something to prop me up. We kind of had all the tricks there. And also Jen was able to be with me for a couple of days at least, so I was covered as far as needing to reach things or not having to get up. And food was the big thing, because after the 2 procedures, it turned out I was having some dysphagia, which means if I try and eat anything that has too much kind of volume or solidity to it, it gets stuck somewhere and I start like burping and coughing, and it really, really hurts. I tried a chicken tender right after the surgery and it was so bad I gagged it up. So I haven't been able to eat normally, you know, through all of this. So first couple of days at home, April 5th and 6th, were basically the most hopeful I have felt through all of this, because it felt like I had something bad, but they identified it, they fixed it, and now it's just kind of a linear recovery. We were told a day in the hospital, a week at home under care, a month for total recovery, at which point I would be able to lift things again, and we thought we would be able to continue with our Yukon plan per everything we were being told, assuming no complications. And then on April 7th, late in the day, I started having gut pain again. This hit me pretty hard because I thought it was over with. You know, at first it just kind of came on a little bit, and my internals didn't feel normal. I had somebody email me who had had a internals surgery years ago, and he kind of reassured me that it took him a long time to feel normal. So I was trying not to freak out, but here I was, I thought I was out of pain, and now it's back. So that was the evening of the 7th when it came on. I was basically in bed, in pain all day on the 8th. And then on April 9th, I finally had to just raise the white flag, go back to the ER. We did contact the surgeon. Now, his office has a, call this number if you're having trouble after surgery, talk to the nurse, and then ended up getting a call back from Dr. Boyrell. He basically said he wasn't worried at this point because I had my organs that were getting insufficient blood for an extended period of time, and it could take over 3 months for basically all the tissue to perfuse back. That was a little bit comforting, except the pain didn't stop, didn't get better. And so on April 9th at night, I finally just had Jen come back and then said, we got to go to the ER, and we drove back to Scripps. They got me in. They looked at me, they gave me, more Dilaudid, so I was out of pain, but there wasn't a lot they could really do. At this point, they could get me out of pain and then discharge me because all of my tests were relatively normal. I had a little bit higher white blood count, some general things that indicated my body was maybe a little inflamed and fighting something, but I just had 2 major surgeries and, I was in recovery. So a few hours later, they discharged me and I go back home already feeling the pain pills wearing off. The next day, April 10th, I'm feeling a little bit better. I spent most of the day in bed. I have a Steam Deck, and that's been my way of distracting myself playing video games because I can't plan when I can't go do anything. And reading and audiobooks I find easier in more calm circumstances, not where I'm in pain and worrying, unfortunately. So I was basically sitting in bed all day. I think I played through the entirety of Halo Reach in one go. And by the end of that, I was up, and I decided to go sit at my laptop out in the living room and see if I could get some actual productive work done. Did that for a couple hours, answering emails, making notes, things like that. And then I noticed that my legs were feeling funny. They started out kind of red and swollen and then got increasingly painful while I was sitting there. And it spread up to my knees, and it was this weird swelling where the skin was showing all these lumps. And then my feet just started to hurt like crazy, and those red little dots that I'd had after surgery came back with a vengeance, except they weren't just there, they were hurting. I ended up having to basically lie on my back with my feet up in the air, or else it was so bad I couldn't manage it. So I did that for a while. I'm home alone at this point. Jen's back in Irvine teaching. She can come out if it's an emergency, but it takes a couple of hours. She did end up coming out that day. She didn't get there for a couple of hours. By then, I felt like it wasn't getting any worse. I was able to kind of manage it. We had called the surgeon again. Unfortunately, the doctor from that practice that called me back tried to convince me that it was hives. Now, my medical training is limited to wilderness first aid, but even I know hives don't start like that on, the extremities. There was no way they were hives, but that he was just convinced, and I couldn't get anything else out of him. We did debate going to the ER, and honestly, if I'd had an easy way to get to the ER right when it happened, I would have gone. Unfortunately, if I went in and they gave me pain pills or a pain shot, I wouldn't be able to drive myself home. We would have cars in multiple places, all of that. So I waited until Jen got there. At that point, it seemed like it wasn't getting any worse. We're doing all sorts of research online, trying to figure out what this is on our own. We're messaging our doctor friend to see what they can give us here, just doing whatever we can, but it's stable. And if I'd gone into the ER because my legs had to be propped up, I wouldn't have been able to be upright even if Jen drove me. So we would have basically had to drive me in the back of the Jeep with my legs propped up and figure out how to get me into the ER through the waiting room, which is usually 30 or 40 minutes in horrible amounts of pain before I'd get in a bed where I could get some relief. So we monitored it, kept me propped up. That basically managed it. And as we started Googling, etc., all the symptoms, we came up with IgA vasculitis / HSP, which is this long German word I'm not even going to try and pronounce because, as anybody who watches this channel knows, my pronunciations are my own. So we had a theory, but we wouldn't know what was going on for a while, and there was still kind of that fear of, this is supposed to be over, why is this happening? Didn't go to the ER that day. On the 11th, I was feeling better, except I couldn't walk. My knees were swollen, my legs were swollen. The 12th, it's getting better. The swelling's going down. I'm still mostly in bed. On the 13th, that rental was over. We had just got it as a temporary thing because we were in the hospital at the time and we didn't know like what the plan going forward was. So now we knew I needed about a month to recover. So we looked around and we found an affordable rental out in Warner Springs. That is further out to the east from where we had been. You know, you basically continue out east past Palomar from Ramona. So it was a little less accessible to the hospital, but when we made the rental, it was like, okay, so I sit at home, I've got these surgical follow-ups, but they're rare. And it's hard to find these days out in this area rentals that are affordable, quiet, and where you're not constantly hearing the just roar of traffic. And if I'm going to be trapped, not able to get out into the wilderness, I needed quiet to stay sane and not feeling like I was locked away inside. Also, the area is basically where the PCT crosses through Warner Springs. So you've got Eagle Rock and some pretty areas. And there was a vineyard on the property you can see in the background. So there were areas where I could walk around. So it seemed like it would be ideal for recovery. And it is moving day once again. I am not allowed to carry anything, and I'm not always so great if I'm up out of bed. So Jen's been moving everything to the cars. We're gonna have about an hour drive out to Warner Springs. So it was a little rough moving. Jen had to move all of our bins and everything, the bike, get everything set up because I'm not allowed to lift anything. I had to drive myself over, which took a lot out of me, but by the end of the day, we were set up and we now had 5 weeks out in Warner Springs through May 18th, and all I had to do was recover. Easy, right? The next day or two, I'm doing a little better. I'm eating a little more. I'm feeling a little better. And then on the 15th, the pain starts again. By the end of the day, the pain was what I would call severe, unmanageable. Jen came back out just so if I needed to get into the ER, we had options, which again involved like a 2+ hour drive in traffic. And she got here late because I'm panicking, here I am. If I have to go into the ER again, trying to drive myself, I'm not capable of it all the time. And I'm basically starting to wonder, did we make a mistake coming this far out? Should we have just, paid out the year for a more expensive rental closer in? She gets out here. I basically send her to bed and say, I will wake you, but get as much sleep as you can. Was just so tired looking. And about 3 a.m., I wake her up and I'm like, we have to go to the ER. I can't take this anymore. I'd spent the entire night just rolling around in misery. The gabapentin they gave me at the previous ER stop, maybe it helped a little, but not really. Again, the Dilaudid just felt like a placebo at the doses they had gave me. So we decided to go in again. Rather than an hour and a half to Scripps, we drove into Temecula where there was another ER. And since it was like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, they did get us in quickly. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot they could do. They shot me up with Dilaudid again. Talked to the doctor there. They wanted to do yet another CT scan. We said no. I had like 5 or 6 of them by this point. They seemed to want to do them at the drop of a hat. I really wish I had said no to some of the initial ones when I was coming in with like a respiratory infection and some of those, just to save myself the radiation doses for all of this. But we also knew we had a follow-up with the surgeon on the 17th, which was the following day at this point, since it was now early on the 16th. So we basically decided to go home, wait it out. We asked if we could get anything adjusted as far as the pain pills. Unfortunately, because of the various abuses of opioid prescriptions, that can be kind of hard. The guy even said, yeah, I didn't write your original prescription. Another doctor trying to do that, and these kind of like edge cases is where we get into the danger zone. So you're going to have to go back to your original doctor. So I went home. Basically, the pain was still continuing. I was on Dilaudid. I was on gabapentin. There just was nothing that would manage it. It got it down to miserable but tolerable, but nothing gave me a break. any sleep I got had to come at basically like the point of exhaustion. So on the 17th, we drive all the way back to Scripps. We're talking to Dr. Boyrell in his office. First time we'd seen anybody outpatient. Walk through the door. He can tell I'm in pain, takes one look at all the dots on my leg, basically says, oh, that's an immunoreaction. It's because you had 2 surgeries back to back. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you to the ER. They're going to admit you. We're going to give you a mass dose of steroids. That should knock it down. You should be good. I'll check in with you tomorrow. So, okay, back over to the ER I go. I'm eventually brought in, given more pain shots, and I'm giving a mass dose of prednisone. I don't even know what the dose was for that one, but it was a shot, and the nurse said, just a heads up, this is going to light your pants on fire. And I'm like, because I'm just in so much pain. So I'm sitting there. I start to get jittery from all of that, but I'm out of immediate pain. The ER doctors start coming in and talking to me, and they're disagreeing with Dr. Boyrell. Basically, they say, well, the steroids can mask it. We want to find out what's going on. So rather than just sticking you on steroids, we're going to admit you, but we're going to take you off the steroids and we're going to figure out what's going on. And fair enough. I mean, the last thing I wanted was to just be tossed back out the door and then have this come back as soon as I'm at home, because at this point, it's kind of terrifying being at home away from care, in pain and unable to manage it. So I'm brought into the hospital. I get reinstalled at, floor 6. I start seeing familiar nurse faces again. And they say they're going to refer me to a rheumatologist and to an infectious disease doctor just to try and figure out what's going on, what could have triggered this. So that night was basically just kind of getting through it. By the next morning, I was actually feeling pretty good. My biggest issue was boredom, kind of being locked up in the hospital. I was very familiar with the whole rigmarole in there, but I wasn't in pain. The steroids had kind of done their job, and it wasn't until late afternoon, evening where I had a new round of the red dots, petechiae, that popped up on the bottom of my feet. The next day, though, by now I'd been off the steroids for a little while. I woke up and I just wasn't feeling well at all. I was tired. I was cold. By 7 a.m., I wasn't feeling great. By 8:30, severe abdominal pain yet again. They shoot me up on pain shots. That's the one advantage of the hospital. And then I start getting to see the rheumatologist and the infectious disease doctor. They basically start doing a bunch of tests. The rheumatologist was pretty sure that I needed steroids. The infectious disease doctor asked me what my exposure was, had I been traveling, etc. I give him a quick summary of the last couple of years, across the U.S., over other countries, underwater, above water, yada, yada. He just kind of goes, I'm going to have to think about this, and orders more blood tests than I've ever seen. Just vials of blood going out everywhere. And we were getting results for 2 weeks from labs where they had to send them off to weird places. They also said they were going to bring in a dermatologist and get a biopsy to try and see, was this actually IgA vasculitis HSP. The rest of the day and the night after all that was difficult. I was in pain. I was doing the Dilaudid shots basically as quickly as they would give them to me, and still I was in pain. They did try me on a new medication, Nicinta, just to see if that would do better, since I was becoming a little more used to the Dilaudid. They were having to up the dose. But it was basically another rough night. So the next day, they basically are agreeing that this looks like IgA vasculitis HSP, and they started me on steroids. We're still waiting for the biopsy to confirm it, but it makes sense what's going on. The steroids took a while to take effect. When the hospitalist came back, I think it was Dr. Lewis at that point, my Dilaudid doses were up to 1 milligram plus a breakthrough, and I needed them. I mean, I had been in pain all night, and they have a hard time adjusting your pain meds in the middle of the night, just the way the system works. Eventually, the steroids kick in. Pain goes down on April 21st, which was my 5th day in the hospital. I got a biopsy where they basically numbed my foot up, took 2 relatively small but felt big punch holes out of the bottom of my foot, sent them off to a lab. The next day, I'm just waiting for the biopsy results, thinking I can go home. I had one brief scare where I thought they were going to have to redo the biopsy. One of the negative side effects of having access to the care notes. Plus side, you have care notes. You can see what the doctors are putting in the notes, and it's really easy to kind of do your own research, as much as I hate that phrase, because it, for acquaintances of mine, means just looking things up on really dumb blogs and going, oh yes, this obvious pandering thing is what it is. For us, it mostly meant putting it into ChatGPT and using medical journals to figure out what was going on. Eventually, I was discharged at 5:30. I was so ready to go. I basically removed the IV myself. Nurse was there. I was under observation and just got out there. I have yet to get used to having this thing sticking out of my arm, and with all the issues from the first hospital stay, having to redo the IV, I was very paranoid about anything happening with this. After I got home, my mental state when I got home was, it's like, okay, well, we have another diagnosis, but this is a rare thing. And it seems so like unfair and improbable to have two rare conditions happen right after each other. Because Pachychia, well, usually IgA, HSP happens in like small children. So now I've got something that usually happens in younger women and in small children, and I'm dealing with both of them. And it's like, is there something else going on that's just triggering all this? I couldn't help remember that D-dimer test that was like at 4,000, and reading a note online how that usually corresponded with something serious like, bowel cancer or this, that, or the other. Fortunately, my internals have had so many cameras and people in there recently, we're pretty sure this area is clear, even if maybe other areas could have something going wrong. The funny thing is, I actually got a call from the last hospitalist I had, who had suddenly had a change of heart when the HSP diagnosis came back officially from the biopsy. Before that, it seemed like she was just kind of pat me on the hand, and she would like order tests. She loved ordering x-rays and things, but wasn't treating it seriously. Now that I had the diagnosis, all of a sudden, like, she was engaged, and she was like, well, you're having all these weird like complications. We need to make sure this doesn't get any worse. She almost didn't discharge me because she thought maybe I was going to have the rare case where the inflammation would happen, not just in my gut and my feet, but in my throat, and it closed my throat up. So I got a call back from her the following day, and she's like, yeah, we were just reviewing your case, so we want to put you on this weird antibiotic just to avoid like rare side effects. And I'm like, okay, I guess one more pill. What else can I do, right? At least I'm back home. It's far more comfortable to be here in the hospital, other than just that nagging fear that the pain's going to be unmanageable and how long it's going to take me to get to help. It seemed clear at this point that we basically had to go back to scripts for any sort of real care, so hour and a half each way. So back home, the surgical sites were still painful. I was still having issues with the dysphagia, swallowing. I kind of knew what I could manage. Mashed potatoes were okay. A little like lean cuisine pizza, not okay. Lean cuisine mac and cheese, okay. Anything soft that would go down. Carrots, even if I chewed the hell out of them, would kind of trigger that, and I'd be burping and just like hurting. So it made me kind of gun shy on certain types of food. At the same time, I hadn't been eating normally for 2 weeks, so I want all the real food, right? So I'm happy to be home, but I'm not doing well. I still have that general sense of unwellness. I would kind of like point to my other entire upper body and go, I'm just not feeling well, versus anything concentrated. At this point, the side effects of the steroids were kind of the worst. My tinnitus, which I have always suffered from, not from loud music, I just have the genetic version, lucky me. It's great when you combine it with like anxiety, depression issues, let me tell you. Well, it's worse than I've ever had it. Like, the sound is just overwhelming, and mine doesn't go away anyway, but I can't remember ever hearing it this loud, driving me nuts. And I kind of figure, based on what I'm seeing online, that this has to be like the steroids that they gave me. I have new pain pills that I'm resorting to sometimes, the Nicinta. They help a little bit, but they still don't really stop the pain. So it's just hard to get through time, because I'm just lying there and I'd be playing video games or reading or doing something, and then the pain would get so bad I would just be basically sitting there trying to pass time, staring at the clock. So the next couple of days, things kind of continue like that. I try and go for a walk outside around the property here, and any exertion just seems to like peg my cardio, my pulse goes up. I feel just awful. Just like a slight walk up a driveway. I can do it, but it feels very, very wrong. So most of my moving around is just pacing around the house. I do that a lot when I'm in pain and just uncomfortable. It seems to help. Similar when I was in the hospital, I would just walk around the 6th floor a lot at all hours of the day. So by the 26th, I'm feeling maybe a little bit better, but on the 27th, I wake up again, stomach pain, chills. I'm taking Lycinta, I'm taking Dilaudid, doesn't seem to be working. Got a bit better by noon, but the pain was just coming and going. At this point, I'm deep into it going, this isn't over. You know, why is this happening? It was pretty bad. But Jen was there with me for the weekend. She was cooking me some real food. She was doing her best to cook things that had like rice that I could get down. Unfortunately, that night I had another rough night, and I woke Jen up at 3 a.m. and said, I can't take this. I have to go back in. I was bound and determined not to do that. This is why I waited until 3 a.m. instead of middle of the night. I wanted her to be able to get some sleep. We talked about it and decided by this time she was kind of maxing out the time off of work. So we decided she would drop me off at the ER on her way, go to school, deal with everything she had to, and then she could be with me by 4 p.m. Not ideal, but at this point I'd been in and out of the hospital. It's not like I didn't know the rigmarole. She can monitor all the notes through her phone app. So off we went, hour-and-a-half drive. I'm dropped off in the ER. Limp inside. I've got my bag of things because by now I'm like, if I'm going to be tossed back in the hospital, I'm going to have, a couple of changes of underwear. I'm going to have my Kindle. I'm going to have my iPad. I'm going to be ready. I got into the ER. They were able to get me back pretty quick. Not that many people there at like 4:30, 5 a.m. The ER doctor came in, and instantly I was kind of nervous because he was talking like, oh, Mal's, yeah, that must not have been it. He was talking about doing a colonoscopy. He hadn't read my file, but he did give me the pain shots so I could at least function for a while. After a while, he read the file. We talked, and the decision was I was going back into the hospital just to be monitored because of, the pain. So I went in. I thought at this point I was getting a colonoscopy. I was getting more scans, things like that. Didn't care. When the pain was so bad, there wasn't much that I would have actually balked. We were trying to be reasonable on the CT scans, just like the radiation, but at a certain point, I didn't care, and I would just toss it to Jen because she was more kind of even-minded about all this. She's the one that was like, no, we should probably hold off on the CT at the Temecula ER. I went back to the 5th floor this time, which was the surgical ward. It's a little nicer. The nurses were often busier though. So unfortunately, it was often feeling like I was having to argue to get any of the pain shots. Some of the nurses were great. Most of the nurses were great. One or two, it was a struggle. And my best bet was hitting the button enough that kind of the oversight resource nurse would come in and just give me the pain shot. I mean, this wasn't me just like slurping up every pain shot I could get. Every time I took it, I had it written down on the board, what I'd taken, when I'd taken, because I didn't want to lose track of this, and I wanted to come off and minimize them as much as possible. So I was razor focused on what I'd had, when the next shot was. It's not like I'm hitting it every 10 minutes, just begging for more. So that was highly frustrating, especially my voice was coming and going through some of this, which made it harder to advocate for myself. And sometimes the nurses are more amazing than you would expect, but you got to advocate for yourself, right? It's like with any medical care. You're under the care of professionals. The good ones are going to be doing their best. I had some of the doctors that I would trust implicitly. Dr. Tran, the last hospitalist I had during the first surgery, was amazing. And if I could get him full time, I would do pretty much anything to do that. Others, they're seeing a lot of different cases, and They're going to make assumptions. They're going to make judgment calls. It was easier when Jen was there because she could communicate a little clearer, because when I was in pain and I didn't have my voice, it was kind of like I would croak out, but I didn't have it in me to argue past a certain point, and I try very hard not to be that unpleasant screaming person. There was one of those in the hospital 2 doors down from me the first time I was on the 6th floor, and I heard her just like yelling and abusing nurses the entire time. I think she had dementia or something going on, but I very much did not want to be that person. So lots of pain shots when I could get them. Eventually, night shift nurse came on. I had one more shot, and then I was put on a higher steroid dose. The rheumatologist came by and basically said I should have called him when the pain started. Didn't know that. I don't know if that was on us or just how the communication was should have happened, that he was the primary. But okay, now we know. My 20 milligram dose of prednisone is now up to 60. And in addition, they also started me on Cellcept, which was an immunosuppressant. After I was put on those, it took a while for the higher dose of steroid to have an effect. Funnily enough, when I was put on the 20, I really noticed the tinnitus, the jitters, everything else. And then it had gotten easier to take after a couple of days. Now I'm on 60 and the side effects are pretty bad. You Google prednisone side effects and they are a nightmare. My father had to go on it for a lower dose for pneumonia. He's older and couldn't take it after a couple of days. The worst is just the mood swings. I couldn't handle anything. I was getting highly emotional. I was easily overwhelmed by as much as a phone call. Yeah, that was kind of the hardest thing to manage. But when I was clear-headed, it's like, well, that's easier to take than, being in unmanageable pain. And all I have to do is survive a couple of weeks at this. It'll taper down, and it should be gone. At this point, the HSP diagnosis is pretty solid. Rheumatologist is very confident that this just needs to be managed. HSP/IgA vasculitis, same thing, clears in about a month, almost always. So all I needed to do was basically take enough medications to prevent it from attacking and causing damage during that, meaning the little like capillaries on my feet. Per the doctors, the red spots on my feet were basically an indicator of what was going on internally, which is why I was having, pain in my gut. So control the symptoms, let the body recover. They didn't really know what was triggering it. I asked because I'm like, this just seems so improbable, unfair. And they're like, it's hard to say. I had 2 surgeries back to back. I'd been under anesthesia 3 times and they give you a whole cocktail there. I'd had various sorts of inflammation. Also, often vasculitis, IgA vasculitis, HSP is triggered by a respiratory infection. And if you remember, a week or 2 before all of this started, I had had a really bad round of bronchitis that put me into urgent care. So that's textbook. That could have triggered it. We just don't know. So April 30th, I am discharged again. Couldn't wait to get out of there again. Couldn't wait to get the IV out of my arm again and come back out here to Warner Springs. And I was in pretty low spirits. Jen is the eternal optimist. She is always just deeply convinced that things are getting better from here. Things will work out till the end. And then there's me who, long enough point of view, survival rate approaches 0. None of us are getting out of this alive, yada, yada. It's part of why we mix. She finds me funny, and I find it nice to be around her brightly naive outlook at times. But it can be hard when it feels like I was just going through this again and again, and she just kept assuming it was going to be over. And I'm like, this doesn't feel like it's over. It felt almost like she was dismissing the concerns. The following day, I drive all the way back out to Scripps for follow-ups, dermatologist to get the stitches out of my foot, which was a relief, and the rheumatologist. Unfortunately, insurance being what it was, we were having issues there. We had to schedule a bunch of different appointments. I think it was an ENT, a dermatologist, rheumatologist, and there was at least one more in there. And we're still trying to get the original like MRI done. And if you're not in the US, there are different forms of messed up healthcare out here. We are on what's called a PPO, which allows you to kind of choose your own doctors. Plus side, I do get some choice. Downside, they're in network and out of network. We looked, we couldn't find a rheumatologist that was in network that could see us quickly. The guy we'd seen in the hospital we really liked, because when Jen called his office number, she didn't get like a nurse or anything. He picked up and he talked to her. That was huge. And basically we made the decision that we're better off paying out of pocket a couple $100 to see him, just with how unstable this felt, because he knew it. And he'd seen me before. In hospital, it was covered. In his office, 3 blocks away, all of a sudden it wasn't covered. Q Butters singing about navigating the American healthcare system, Jen's favorite song now. So we made that call, drove out, saw him. I basically told him, yeah, it really feels like these side effects are killing me, but I'll put up with it if I have to. I have monitoring now for like urine and blood to make sure I'm not getting kidney problems. The steroids can trigger all sorts of issues. So, and at this point, I'm like not discounting anything. There's steroid-induced diabetes, for example. So 3-hour round trip to do that. It's a struggle getting through the office visits. 2 days later, I go to an ENT to try and figure out like what's going on with my voice. You can hear me getting hoarser. This is the best I've been in a couple of days, and I still can't swallow some things correctly. So now they're like jamming this thing down my nostril, and I'm getting to see my vocal cords as I'm going me, 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 which was interesting and highly unpleasant, especially in like the emotional roller coaster of the prednisone. I'm just trying to keep it together as all this is going on. Not to mention the initial sit down with the doctor where they're like, so I read your file, there's a lot there. Can you kind of give it to me in your own words? And it's like, trying not to be overly dramatic, trying not to skip too much. Outcome of that was things above my vocal cords, you know, basically there's this flap here at the top of your throat that is how you breathe versus eat. I got to see it on the camera during the exam. That's fine. I'm not in danger of aspirating. The things he had me try to swallow, graham crackers, etc., things were going down correctly. So he referred me to a speech therapist to try and take care of this, and then a follow-up scan to get an x-ray to see what's going on down here where things are getting stuck. We're now a week later. I'm still trying to get that scheduled. We're only about to get the MRI I've been trying to get since the beginning of the year for the lower back pain. Not that I really want to drag this out anymore, but I think I'm going to cut this video here. It's gotten plenty long just discussing the following 2 hospital stays I had. There will be another video out in a day or two kind of talking about what the long-term things are and plan-wise where we're going from here. So I really thought / hoped I was going to be able to record another video this morning, but I end up waking some days with like just the shakes and weakness, and my voice will probably be going away here in not that long of talking. Honestly, the hardest part of all this has just been kind of being in limbo like this. I don't know when I'm going to be feeling well enough that I can sit at the computer and work and write and get things done or record videos, or when I'm feeling this bad and I'm basically going to have to crawl back into bed.